welcome back. In the last video I did an overview of the Spider-Man franchise before it became part of the MCU. This time we're looking at the latest entry of Marvel's cinematic lineup, Spider-Man No Way Home. Firstly, I think it's important to mention that this film is particularly difficult to delve into without mentioning spoilers, so I'm going to limit plot details to what is inferable from the trailers. So how did we get to where we are now? Well, the MCU Spider-Man portrayed by Tom Holland first made an appearance back in Captain America Civil War, and has played in an important role ever since. There is actually a strong possibility that Peter Parker's MCU journey technically started back in Iron Man 2, but this is more of an Easter egg. He has gone on to feature in two solo movies, Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home, as well as several large-scale movies. Contrary to previous film adaptations, this variant of Spider-Man did not include a hero origin story. Instead, we are thrown straight into the life of a working, established young Spider-Man and his new girlfriend MJ, played by Zendaya. During his journey, he encounters villains such as Vulture, Shocker, and most recently, Mysterio. This latter fight ended with severe consequences as the death of Quentin Beck, or Mysterio, was twisted. Not only did Beck reveal Spider-Man's identity to the entire world, but also framed him for murder. This takes us to the start of No Way Home, where our protagonist finds himself in the precarious position of being the world's most famous, or infamous, college applicant. The world is torn as to whether they see him as a shining beacon of hope or a massive danger to society. After Peter and his closest friends are denied admission to their college of choice, MIT, purely based on their affiliation to Spider-Man, Peter seeks out the help of Stephen Strange. Doctor Strange informs him of the possibility of a spell that would make the world forget Spider-Man's identity, and in turn solve these problems that they face. Unsurprisingly, this spell doesn't go quite according to plan, and results in some unwanted side effects. The crux of them is that villains from alternative realities, or universes, find themselves here causing varying degrees of chaos.
Hello, Peter.
In terms of the narrative, I thought it was a very interesting and creative plot device to merge the previous iterations of the Spider-Man universe into one film. It creates a sense of nostalgia and appreciation for what came before. One of the burning questions that played on my mind both before watching the movie and during it was how this plays out in terms of the number of characters. As I mentioned in the last video, both Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 both suffered from similar problems in that they had too many characters and not enough time to properly develop them. Those films felt congested and cluttered, and ultimately unsatisfying. I'm glad to say that this isn't the case here. Although there isn't much character development, there is a real sense of unity and synergy with the array of characters on both sides of the coin. Looking back on the experience as a whole, I found it to be a bit of a roller coaster in more ways than one. Firstly, the action scenes were full of adrenaline and fun, comparable to a theme park ride. But also the feeling of anticipation was a bit like a roller coaster too. The film had an initial spike or peak very early, which left me wondering, would it maintain this trajectory, or would it ultimately be unsatisfying from that point onwards? I think it's fair to say that it did slow down in terms of pace, and opted for a more light and grounded approach. But as evident from the cheers and celebration from the crowd in the cinema, towards the final act of the movie, it once again built up suspense and excitement. These feelings, combined with a real sense of nostalgia, elevated the experience and left fans with exactly what they signed up for. If I had to sum up this film in one line, it would be crowd pleaser. There is one question that some may wonder, which is how does this film work as a standalone production, adrift from the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's quite a difficult question to answer, as it's more of a celebration of the MCU and what led to it in the first place. It's a perfectly enjoyable film in its own right, but I do think it's primarily one for the fans of Spider-Man and the franchise as a whole. So many of the moments are a subtle nod to the past, and therefore being familiar with some of these things is essentially a prerequisite for maximum enjoyment. In terms of the different aspects and criteria for the film, I think the characters felt solid, and I got the impression that there was real chemistry between them on screen. This was especially impressive given that many of them hadn't shared the screen before. The story itself is somewhat overshadowed by the thrill of what you're witnessing. The idea of a failed college application indirectly causing a breakdown of the fabric of the multiverse did feel a little contrived, but I understand that there are many elements at play here. On the one hand, it's building towards the next phase of the MCU, while also utilising aspects of the source material. Last, in terms of the criteria, the visuals. There is always a danger that throwing too much CGI at something takes away from some of the tangibility and immersion, but I didn't get that feeling while watching it. Some of the visual effects were genuinely amazing, and overall is comparable to Doctor Strange, which set a new benchmark for solo Marvel productions. The last thing I want to touch on is how the film stacks up against the rest of the Spider-Man movies. I would say that it's right up there as one of the best in the series. Overall, the Tom Holland movies have set a much higher and more consistent standard, but personally, I still think the best Spider-Man movie of all time is Spider-Man 2. The level of cinematic artistry and attention to detail is still at the top for me. I also want to give a quick mention to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Sony's Spider-Man PlayStation game, both of which are outstanding. The fact that No Way Home is comparable is a great sign. I'm personally looking forward to what they do next. If you haven't seen the movie yet and are planning to, check out my previous Spider-Man video, which gives a run through of the series and what you need to know before watching. I hope you enjoyed the content, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe. Cheers!